with you today delighted to be with you today to share a little bit about 5 conversations. And these are the 5 conversations that we know from all of our experience and neuroscience and engagement research that's out there that are really key to transforming trust, engagement and performance at work. And we know that the world of work has changed quite dramatically over the last 3 or 4 years. And we've got this increasingly virtual and hybrid world. And we fundamentally believe that these conversations are even more important now than they've ever been before. So just to do very quick introductions, I'm Andy, I'm one of the directors here at the Oxford Group, and I've had the great pleasure of doing a lot of work around 5 conversations over the last 5 years, and have delivered it all over the world to clients, large and small. And it's probably one of the most powerful programs I've ever had the pleasure of delivering. So I'm one of the world's biggest fans of 5 conversations. I'm also joined by Maggie, so I'll hand over to you, Maggie, to say hello.
Great. Hi. Thanks, Andy. I'm Maggie Matthews, Associate Director here at the Oxford Group. And if Andy's the biggest fan, I'll have to give him that. I'll come in second. So again, I just like the 5 conversations approach, and I'm keen, eager to share it with you today, to give you an experience of it, and for you to think about how you can use it straight away, really, off this call, in fact, because we're going to give you an opportunity to try it out as well. For those of you who don't know us, the Oxford Group is part of the City and Guilds, and we are a global provider of management and leadership development alongside exec coaching. So we work with tens of clients around the world, and thousands of managers on an annual basis, upskilling and helping them to think about how their organizations are led from a skills and a transformation and cultural perspective. So if anyone's keen to chat to us, give Andy or I a shout after the call today. That's it as far as I'm telling you about the Oxford Group. If I've piqued your curiosity, come and talk to us. So let's Andy, let's find out more about 5 conversations.
Yeah, so we always think it's nice to kick these things off with a bit of audience participation. So what we were hoping for is for you to give us your thoughts really on what you think is the most important driver of employee engagement. I know it's very, very difficult to pin it down to one thing, but we're just keen to get your take on the biggest thing, the biggest driver for you, the thing that's most important personally. In fact, it does say you can select 3 there, so I'm not going to be quite as mean as I thought, but let's say 3 then. So Mike's going to talk us through how to use the annotation tools, and we should see this slide come to life. So Mike, if you're okay to talk everyone through it, that'd be great.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, if you've not done it before, it is super easy to do. If you just hover your mouse over the shared screen, in the bottom left corner you should see a little pencil, which when you hover over that, it'll say annotate it. If you don't see that, at the menu bar at the top, there's in the view option drop down, you should also see annotate there. So if you just click onto that, and the menu that pops up, you should see an option for stamp. And if you if you hover over that, you'll see a little tick mark. So if you press that and then press anywhere on the screen, it'll just appear like the tick I've just put has done now.
Here we go. Look, everybody's got the hang of it, Mike. It's going to start to build now. Oh, right. So we have an early front runner, which is relationship with the line manager, which is definitely out there in the lead. Let's see what else we get as this slide builds. So employee voice being heard, development opportunities. Let's give it a second and see where that builds. Okay, vision and value of the organization seems to be growing a bit there as well. Okay, I'm just going to give it another.
I feel like you're doing an auction, Andy. It feels like you're.
I know, going once, going twice. Okay, right. So it looks to me like relationship with the line manager is definitely coming out strong there, and the employee voice being heard. So thank you everybody for sharing your thoughts. So I think it goes without saying all of the things that were on there were important, are really important. And we know from the research that we've done around employee engagement that there's some key themes that come out. So first, it's visible leadership. Are leaders there, and are they showing a clear purpose and vision? And are they connecting their people to those things? Are they also engaging their managers? So do they care enough about them to build individual relationships and get to know them on an individual basis? And do they care enough about them to coach them and stretch them? And that doesn't always mean to coach them and stretch them into the next role. It might just be to support them in the role that they're in. Employee voice being heard. So firstly, are we seeking the opinions of our people? And more importantly, are we truly listening and acting upon those things? That's also extremely important. And organizational integrity in terms of the values that the organization outwardly states, are these lived and experienced by the people in the business, by those that are leading the organization? Now, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, because most of you from the delegate list that we saw are from the HR and learning and development space, so you'll be more than aware of these things. But the one thing that we believe passionately, and this is really partly where 5 Conversations was born from, is that we know that the quality of conversations with the line manager is the thing that carries so many of these messages and either makes them or breaks them. Mm-hmm. So Maggie, I'll hand over to you to talk a little bit about the approach.
Thank you. So, and thanks for that lead in, Andy, about the conversations with line managers. And that's what the 5 Conversations approach is all about, actually. And it's not about being perfect, and it's not about being highly skilled. Actually, it's about mindset and intent. It's how our managers show up in those conversations, and how they see them as a two-way. So it's not manager, I do unto you. The conversations are designed for a two-way interaction, something that feels human and authentic. So individuals can feel that their managers really are actually interested in how they're performing, how they're doing, how they can be supported either by the manager themselves or the systems around them. And we do quite a bit of work helping managers to understand that, that piece around mindset. And it's also, the 5 Conversations are, the 5 Conversations are static themselves, but they're all built around the context that the manager and the individual find themselves at any given time. So they're sort of future-proof in some ways, because they are based on what's happening now, and it's based on real conversation. So I think all of those things are quite important messages that we try to land on around the 5 Conversations and what they mean. I mean, we created 5 Conversations, Andy, and I can't believe it. It's 13 years ago now, and you weren't around the Oxford Group then, but I was, and it feels like 5 years ago. We originally did some work with AstraZeneca, and they called us in to help them with a culture shift they were trying to make, to create the conditions where managers and their team members were having real conversations linked to performance, linked to engagement, linked to getting things done. And we created a program called Constructive Conversations. And having done quite a lot of research within AstraZeneca, we identified for AstraZeneca some of the key conversations that would help them shift the dial that they were trying to shift. That was in 2010. We ran a program for several years with and we worked with over 1,500 managers, and I guess if each of them have 10 reports, it's quite a lot of people that would have been affected and impacted by 5 Conversations. From that, in 2013, we built the concept into the 5 Conversations that we've got today, which is a program and a book. And we've been working with clients, and we've worked with over 100 global organizations now, using 5 Conversations in different ways. At one end, it's a skill, it's a set of skills that a line manager can use with their teams. And at the other end, it's supporting a complete culture change where client organizations are really wanting to shift how we do things around here, and how we engage and work with our teams and take them with us. So a shift from that top down to a more collaborative way of working. And 5 Conversations, the approach and style has contributed to supporting organizations in doing that. Andy, I don't know if you want to add anything to that in terms of the origin of 5 Conversations.
No, I think you've covered it off beautifully. I think it is a really versatile tool. I think we talk about it in the context of line manager to direct report. But as you'll see and experience yourself, these are powerful conversations that you can have peer to peer. In fact, we very often have them in the Oxford group and in our client organizations. They tend to see that these conversations don't have to be just line manager and direct report. They can be colleague to colleague. And in some cases, they can be to your customer. In fact, I've had a number of conversations like this with esteemed colleagues in learning and development where we've been building a relationship in varying different ways. So they do cross over. They aren't just line manager to direct report, but that in its purest sense is where they were born from.
Yeah, and I guess the nature of them being two-way, they're up conversations as well as direct reports. Thanks, Andy. And the conversations themselves, these are the 5 conversations which you may have come across before in some of your readings or your interactions with us. They're not sequential, they're not a magic wand, but together, used at the right time and the right place alongside the systems and processes within your organization, they are hugely effective. And I guess leaving one out, so not doing all of them, can possibly leave a team member or a stakeholder missing an unmet need that they may have. Conversation 1 starts with building a trusting relationship, and conversation 5 ends with a sort of a future focus. But they're not sequential, and they can be done at any time in the year. They complement performance management processes really well. And in fact, several clients that we're working with are launching new performance management approaches alongside the skills and mindsets of 5 conversations to help upskill line managers, so that performance management is taken away from that annual 3 conversations and it's moved into an everyday activity that can be done at any time. And I guess there's some of the why around these things. In a moment, Andy's going to talk about some of the science behind the conversations. But if I was to talk about some of the why, and if you move to the next slide, the 2020 Gallup report, which actually came out yesterday. They're launching it tomorrow in a webinar if anybody is available to do it. We're not affiliated with them, but we like some of their work and their research. I mean, they're telling us that engagement contributes to productivity and profitability, and that's the why for these conversations, because we know they increase engagement. And I guess if we look at a very simple chain reaction about how that shows up visually, from that research in Gallup and from a lot of the neuroscience and a lot of the other research we're seeing, and in fact from the poll that we saw at the start, the quality of the conversation has a huge impact on our relationship with our managers, and that relationship with our managers has an impact on how engaged we are, and that engagement has an impact on how we perform. It's as simple or as complex as that, and we're starting, and we sometimes like to think of this as engagement from the bottom up. So it's not a push down. It's not a push down formal comms exercise around engagement. It starts with the relationships with our colleagues and with our line managers, and it builds engagement and performance through the organization. So that's some of the why behind it. And Andy, I know you're going to talk to us now a little bit more about some of the science and of 5 conversations.
Thanks, Maggie. Yeah, and before I do that, one thing we're going to do as a second part of audience participation for today is we'd like you to think about a difficult conversation that you've had in the past, maybe one that hasn't gone quite so well. And what we'll do, we've got a random wheel, like a wheel of fortune, that will have all of your names on it, and it will pick one of you at random to share your experience of your difficult conversation. So we'd like you to share that, and then what we'll do is we'll get into that and we'll look at how we could improve upon that, and if there's any colleagues that have got any ideas of how you maybe could have dealt with that slightly differently. Before we do that, I'm just going to talk about the neuroscience, and I'm going to talk about what we call the triadic brain, and these are the 3 core parts of the brain that are engaged when we are in relationships at work particularly. So we've got the amygdala, the ventral striatum, and the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, we spent quite a bit of time making sure our neuroscience is up to speed, and we've done a lot of work with Dr. Patricia Riddell out of the University of Reading to help us make sure that our neuroscience is bang on. Okay, I'm going to stop there, because I promise you we would never, ever, ever get you to share a difficult conversation in front of a group, and we certainly wouldn't debrief it and look at what you've done wrong and what you could do better moving forward. That certainly isn't our style here at the Oxford Group. But there was a reason that we did that, and I'm just interested if any of you would like to come off mute, and this isn't a trick, by the way, just to share how maybe you felt in that moment when you thought maybe the wheel of fortune may land on you. Did it bring out any reactions in anyone? And normally, if I'm quiet enough, someone.
I think Louise unmuted herself, so she's going to.
Thank you.
I did. I was just looking to try and see if I could put my hand up, and I couldn't see it, so I thought I'd just unmute. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, probably slightly anxious and unprepared. So I was just kind of thinking through, like, how did the conversation go? Where were the areas where I'd kind of reflected afterwards that could have been better? So yeah, just not so much talking about the difficult conversation, because I think that's it's important, and I've done it quite a lot recently, but just like being able to share succinctly how that conversation went and any kind of areas I thought where I could have improved.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
And we've had in the chat, Andy, from Sasha talking about having neurodivergence, and the response to that would be no way. I don't care if the random wheel lands on me, I ain't doing it. So and I guess probably in that state we may or may not even have listened to any words that you said after you issued that.
Yeah, and we've got some stuff here I can see from Shahida in terms of saying 2 conversations, one made me anxious, the other was fine. Yeah, people were frantically trying to think of an example, and what typically happens in that moment, if I just talk through the actual neuroscience of what happened, is I engaged a threat into our environment, and we can do this really easily as managers of people without even realizing it. But the threat that I introduced was that one of you might get picked at random. So generally what tends to happen, as Louise shared, she went into the mode of what example can I choose? And what's basically happened is the amygdala has woken up. So all of a sudden it's been fine. We're on this webinar, everything's okay. The threat gets chucked into the room, the amygdala wakes up, blood flows to the amygdala. And then we all of a sudden move into that fight or flight mode. What can I share that's going to be appropriate in this moment? How can I go about dealing with this challenge? The problem is when the blood flows to the amygdala, it moves away from the other areas that make us creative and allow us to be able to take on information and things that are going on around us, because we're focused on the threat. What then tends to happen is once we think, okay, we start to move into the fight or flight mode, I need to do something about this, I might get picked, our ventral striatum kicks in, and that is where there's almost a shared memory bank of previous experience where maybe this might have gone right or it might have gone wrong in the past, and that allows us to react in a way that gives us something to work with. That might heighten our fear if we've had a really bad previous experience, or it might make us more likely to say, do you know what, I've been put on the spot before and it's worked out really well for me, so I'm going to come up with an example, and I'm going to sit back and relax. I'm going to take in what this chap is telling me about Dr. Patricia Riddell from the University of Reading. And that's where your ventromedial prefrontal cortex kicks in and allows you to be a little bit more rational, to start to take things on board that might be going on in the environment, and also not to be hijacked really by the threat that is going on, or to realize, do you know what, I have the ability to say, I haven't got an example actually, why don't you pass it over to another colleague? So we can start to rationalize and think more clearly. So that's just some really, really simple neuroscience. And the reason that that is so important and it's fundamental to the conversations that we have is because as human beings, our basic response is to minimize threat. And this is where that fight or flight reaction comes out in people, and to maximize reward. We are emotional creatures at our heart, and then we might make a decision based on emotion, and then we rationalize that. The really important thing to note for leaders is when there is trust in a relationship, we're less likely to trigger the amygdala. People are going to be more open to possibilities in collaboration, but when there is an absence of trust, or there are things that are done that make us feel less trustworthy of people, we become closed, we become defensive, we become suspicious, and all of our effort and energy goes into protecting ourselves, as in the example that we've just experienced there. So these 5 conversations hopefully move people to a point of understanding that you're less likely to put them in that situation where they're going to feel threatened in any way. So what does that mean for us as leaders? We've got to avoid creating threat. And I always think it's always an unintentional threat. I think I've had maybe one leader in my career that's maybe used threat intentionally. I generally think people unintentionally create threat in the system. But what we want to do is use trust to create reward signals. And a lot of that comes down to us being authentic and being ourselves, but also people seeing and understanding what our self is, and for us to understand more about them and their lived experience, so we can understand how to engage with one another. And that's where the first conversation comes in that Maggie is going to take us through. So Maggie, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Andy. So the first conversation is establishing a trusting relationship. And sometimes by the name of it, you think it's something that we do at the beginning of a relationship. Actually, it's an ongoing conversation, establishing a trusting relationship. We can have it at any time. We can have it with somebody that we've known for 20 years, or we can have it with somebody who we've just met. So it's the whole premise around this conversation is about sharing a deep mutual understanding of each other. So thinking about and getting an understanding of others' drivers. What is it that makes them perform? What are their preferences? What motivates them? What turns them on? What turns them off? And swapping that around so you both know about each other. So if we're thinking about this conversation with a direct report, it's about a manager and a direct report understanding each other mutually, taking time out to genuinely understand each other. If it's with a colleague or with a senior leader or a stakeholder, it's about, again, about that mutual understanding to build a trusting relationship. And central to this conversation is the trust equation. Many of you will know this trust equation. It's from the Trusted Advisor, and we haven't seen a better one since 2000. We're waiting. If anyone here has got one, please share it. We like this for its simplicity, and in fact, we've shared this with statisticians. I can't say it, mathematicians, and they say this is not really an equation. We know that, but it's a useful way of demonstrating what we mean by trust. And trust is based on these 4 things: credibility, which is usually assessed by what we say. So people hear our words. We'll sometimes hear, do they walk the talk? Because reliability is about what we do. So it's that match between what we say and what we do, and do we do what we say we're going to do, and do we do as we say. So it's those 2 pieces, alongside intimacy, which is a word that jars with some people. About actually, intimacy really is about how safe do we feel with each other? How safe do I feel with this person? How safe am I being vulnerable with this individual? How safe am I sharing my challenges? How safe am I sharing my hopes, my future dreams? So it's that feeling of being okay, and that nothing bad is going to happen if I share stuff with this person. And all of that sits on top of what we call self-orientation. So we can have the credibility, the reliability, and the intimacy, but if people feel that that's coming from a place of self rather than others, again, it will have an impact on the trust. So if you are demonstrating the top 3, but it feels like you're doing it for your own ends, to achieve your own outcomes and your own results, and not for a mutual reason, it will have an impact on trust. I could talk about this trust equation all day. I won't, because it's we're touching on it, but I use it a lot in assessing relationships I've got around me. So when I'm feeling a relationship is a little bit, why is that not working? What's going on? Because generally my stuff works with most people for me. I'll come to this equation and think about the different elements and what's missing. It's not always the answer, but sometimes it is. So it's that trust equation. It's essential to understanding the underlying trust. And in actual fact, Andy sometimes says it's not about trust, actually, it's trustworthiness. How trustworthy do people feel you are as an individual, and how comfortable as they are. So that's the basis. Now, this doesn't, we know this, this doesn't happen overnight. This is something that we build over time with people. Some of us have a preference for trusting first. Others have to wait for evidence to trust, and we come from different places in that respect. But actually, we can accelerate trust, and that's what conversation one is about. It's about how do I accelerate trust in the various relationships that I've got, and that's through, funnily enough, a conversation. There's one way to do it, and that's to talk about it. And we're going to invite you in a moment to have a conversation privately, not in the whole group. So keep your amygdala quiet for now. It's going to be in pairs in a moment. And what we'd like you to do is to have a conversation together. We're going to have the breakout group for 20 minutes. You'll have 10 minutes each way to focus on one individual, and then you'll swap to focus on the other. And the opening question really that we would like you to ask is, what would you like to ask me that will help you to understand me more? So if I was having this conversation with Andy, I would say, Andy, what would you like to ask me that will help you to understand me more? And to help you, we have some prompt questions. And these are in any of the materials that we use. We share these with people really openly because we think they have real value. So we're going to ask you to use these in your conversations in a moment. So you might want to take a screen grab, or you might want to take a photograph of these. I still mostly can do screen grabs, but then I forget how to do it. So if you've got a phone with you, just take a picture. That's also useful. We're going to ask you to use these questions or any others that you think of. Many of you will probably be deep practitioners in some of this space, so you'll already have a ready bank of questions that you might use in these types of conversations. So if we go back to the previous slide, Andy, we are going to, for 20 minutes, put you into pairs. Mike is going to set you up, and we would like you to have a conversation one using the questions as a guideline or any other questions that come to mind, and be as safe as you need to be in this conversation for yourself. So share what you feel comfortable sharing, and if a question doesn't quite fit at this moment in time or in this context, ask the person to choose another one, and that's okay. So that's 10 minutes each way, and we'll see you in 20 minutes. I think, yeah, it's good that is. Oh, yeah.
Welcome back, everyone.
Welcome back. Just a couple of minutes, really. If anybody wants to put anything into chat about their experience of that conversation, or unmute yourself, I'm interested to know how. If something sort of positive or something startling or interesting for you emerged in that conversation, it'd be great to hear from you. And I'm happy for anybody to unmute themselves or pop it into chat. And note, we didn't record those conversations. You'll have hopefully heard the recording come on and off.
Hi, Maggie.
Hi, Jeremy. Thank you.
It was quite, yeah, it was educational for me. Actually, I had a little chat with Donnie, and going through the questions, it was enlightening to see how many of the answers were impacted by how I'm managed.
Mm-hmm.
So what makes a bad day at work, or what makes you stressed, or you know, I can't remember the whole list of questions, but
Yeah.
if you know that you have a trusting relationship with your line manager, then you know that, you know, someone's got your back, or finding solutions as a team effort rather than on your shoulders. And that it was quite interesting how often it came back to that same point.
Okay.
So with reference to this, it's important to remember that when you're managing people as well, how important the relationship is for that person to know how they can trust you and how consistent you are in supporting them.
Great. Thanks, Jeremy. And I guess it speaks to what Andy talked about earlier, the unintentional impact of some of the behaviors of managers. As Andy said, most are not intentionally creating those conditions, but unintentionally. And part of this is to bring into the consciousness about how intentional we need to be to create the right conditions. Even the nature of being a leader in an organization puts you in a position where people are ready not to trust you. Because if so knowing that as a leader already, and intentionally looking for opportunities to build trust, which you can do through these types of conversations, particularly if you're as free flowing with your responses as you're expecting the other person to be, when having it as a two-way. So thanks for that, Jeremy.
We've got a comment here in chat from Louise as well. So really lovely conversation with Stuart Tucker. Always lovely conversation with Stuart Tucker, I have to say. Lots of synergies in our work and values. Found some of the questions really powerful and insightful. And if honest, some I was a little unsure to ask in case of misinterpretation. And yeah, some of those questions in there you will gravitate to more and feel more comfortable with, and others you won't, and that's fine. They're a selection for you to choose what's appropriate in the moment with the person you're having the conversation with, and what you feel comfortable with as well. So thanks for that reflection, Louise. I think that's really important.
Yeah, and occasionally, Andy, with these and everyone with these questions, I actually sometimes ask the other person to choose the question they want to answer. And that can and when it's when you're sort of on an early stage in a relationship, or there's a power dynamic which might be uncomfortable, putting the answer into the driving seat of which question to answer can make it feel safer, and it can build that a little bit more slowly. So just an idea.
Yeah. And she just put here, I found out I have my own, I guess this is questions, but the sheet was used as inspiration as well. And yes, sometimes you won't need the sheet. Sometimes in these types of conversations, it just goes really free flowing. But sometimes it just helps you and the other person to have some prompt questions ready to go.
And Donny, talking about some of the questions only work when you know the person well, and it's a bit of a chicken and egg because the questions allow you to know somebody well, and then you can get deeper the better you know them. So I 100% agree with you. Probably not, some of them wouldn't be the first question you might ask somebody, and it depends on the starting level of the relationship, the power dynamic, and the maturity actually of the individuals that you're having the conversation with. So they all contribute to the choices you might make in terms of choosing which questions or how you approach the conversation. And some can be quite deep, depending on the person, how articulate they might be, how used they are to talking about themselves. Some of those questions might be too much too soon. So adjusting them for the audience that you're with is really important.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's something really interesting about the time we allocate for these types of conversations as well, because you've all experienced there in 10 minutes, you can get into a really good dialogue with someone. So just 2 or 3 questions at the end of a one-to-one, it would be deemed as a conversation one, or in other cases, it might be that you block out a whole hour or even longer to get into some of this stuff. So with people that you think might need a little bit of warming up into this type of flow, it might feel quite different. Just ease them in gently. Take shorter chunks of time and build that up over a period of time.
Yeah, and I guess conversation one is not one conversation. So it's over a period. Oh, that's quite a nice little strap line. I might use that. I'll trademark that, Andy. So it's several conversations over a period of time, and it's ongoing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we thought you might just like a little stretch for a couple of minutes. We've given you some intense, you've been thinking intensely for the last 20 minutes or so. So we thought maybe just take us to 10:30 UK time, so 3 minutes to just have a stretch. Maybe if you've got time to make a quick coffee, depending on how close your coffee is, but maybe walk around the room. So we'll take a few minutes, 3 or 4 minutes, and we'll see you back about 10:30.
Okay, we're at 10:30, so I'm hopeful that everybody's back. There's a few people that have got their cameras off, so if you could just give me a signal somehow, either by turning your camera on or doing a little
Or a thumbs up.
smiley
Yeah.
face
See
with
thumbs up.
the emojis or something, that would be good, just so I know you're back. Okay, I've got some thumbs up and I've got some
Yeah.
cameras on, so I'm thinking everybody is back and ready to go. So I'm going to take you through the next 3 conversations, I think 2, 3, and 4. Yes, at a relatively quick pace, because we obviously spent some time on conversation 1, so we won't be practicing conversation 2. Conversation 3, Maggie and I will do a little demo for. Conversation 4, we're going to get deep into in our next session. So I'll give you a high-level overview of that so you can get a feel for these conversations. However, we do have some YouTube videos which go into each of the conversations in a bit more depth, which we'll make sure we share with the foundation team so they can send them out to you if you want to get into some of these a little bit more deeply. Conversation 2, though, is the conversation, it's goal setting, but at a much more higher level, and it's more connected than just setting a smart target for someone. And the reason for that is, in this conversation, we work with people to get to their why. And then we help them to share that purpose and connect that to what they're trying to achieve at work. So this conversation is firstly about understanding, well, what is your purpose, and what is probably not the individual, like, 10, 20, 30 tasks that you're working on or big projects over a period of time, but what is the thing that connects a lot of that, or the one big thing that you want to work on with someone over the next period of time? And that could be 2 weeks, it could be 2 months, but we probably advocate it's not like a 2-year period of time that we would use this in. It would be somewhere in the region of a task we want to complete in the next couple of weeks, up to something that's maybe around the 6-month point. And the idea of this is that we get people to understand our why. So why is this particular task really, really important to me? How can that person help you to connect with that or to drive that forward? And then that obviously drives the result. So it's a bit of an inside out conversation. It's based on some of the work of Simon Sinek, which many of you have probably seen the YouTube clip, The Golden Circle, where he talks about people don't care about what, they care about your why. And very often when we're goal setting or we're asking people to support with activity or task, we don't share why that's really important to us. So the flow of this conversation is a 2-way approach, as with the vast majority of the 5 conversations. So what we're trying to do is to get someone to understand what we're trying to achieve, why it matters to us, and what they can do to help us to achieve this. Now, we might want to do that in a coaching style. We might want to say, look, this is what I'm trying to achieve. This is why it matters to me. What do you think you could do to help me with that? And that opens it up to get the other person to think collaboratively and maybe creatively about how they could connect to what you're trying to achieve. Or we might have something more concrete in mind. So it might be that, I don't know, we're going to run a social media campaign on emotional intelligence, for example. Why does that matter? Because at the Oxford Group, we believe that leadership matters, and we know that self-awareness is such an important part of getting leaders to really think about where they need to take their development, and that then can support their people in having a happier and healthier work life. So what could someone in my team do to help me achieve that? Well, actually, we need to build loads of content. So I need your help to do some research on that. So what are the best TED Talks out there around emotional intelligence? Can we build some really nice social cards? Can we get a 12-week campaign to really get this stuff out to help leaders to learn a bit more about emotional intelligence. So that might be me connecting that leadership matters, the bigger purpose for me and the organization, to something more tangible. So that's my side of the story. But for this to really, really work and be a mutual conversation, I need to switch over to the other person. Because if I'm going to ask them to connect with me and help me with something that's really important, wouldn't it be nice if I found out what's important to them? So I might throw it open and say, well, what are you working on over the next few months that's really, really important to you? And they may or may not have something in mind, and we might need to help them to get to that point. And once they've identified something that is really important to them, let's start to think about, well, why does that matter to you? How does that connect to your purpose or your values? And it's not just a transactional thing. We're getting them to really dig into that purpose. And then we're going to explore how I can help them to achieve that. So we've got this two-way mutual exchange between two people who are probably mutually important in achieving what's important to those individuals and to the organization. So the last question in this conversation is, so what are the expectations that we can hold of each other? What are the things that we're going to agree on right now to help power us towards achieving what's important? So hopefully you can see, rather than just setting a smart action plan or an objective, this is much more about two people coming together to work together to achieve the things that are most important and connecting that to purpose. That is ultimately what conversation 2 is all about. And I know it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I hope it gives you an idea of the high level structure of the conversation, how you position it. Conversation 3 is my favorite conversation because it's about catching people in rather than catching people out. It's about helping people to really deeply understand the strengths that they've brought to their work and how they could use more of that within their work. So it's very much about appreciation, and it's also about getting people to understand how their contribution really makes a difference. So it's all steeped in recognition. It's centered on a school of thought which some of you may have come across, called appreciative inquiry. And appreciative inquiry is, I guess, counter to what the traditional way of working is, because we are really, really good as human beings in organizations at spotting what hasn't worked and looking at ways to fix it. And we do that without even needing to think about it or focus on it. We're really good at it. But what we sometimes neglect to do, and this plays through employee engagement surveys where most people feel they don't get enough recognition, is sometimes we don't spend enough time looking at what's gone really well and how we can do more of that. And this conversation is a specific space for that. It's essentially based in, I guess, positive psychology and positive reinforcement. So all we want this conversation to be is about the good stuff. So Maggie and I are going to do a live conversation. This isn't rehearsed, although we've saved it for this particular moment. So Maggie was at an event recently where she stepped in and took on a lead role on something, and I won't give too much away, Maggie, because I know you'll get into it in a minute. It was a CIPD conference a few weeks back, and there was some really good feedback from it, and we thought, wouldn't it be nice to do a planned conversation in this moment to bring that to life? So here goes. So Maggie, I know you were at CIPD a few weeks ago, and I hear that it went really well. Give me I haven't really got into the detail of it with you yet, so give me the high level. What was going on up in London, wasn't it? It
was London, yeah. So about 2, maybe 3 weeks before the CIPD Future of Work, which some of you may have been at actually, event a few weeks ago, somebody in the planning team asked me if I would do one of the keynote speeches on one of the stages, and I was going. My head went, no way. I'm not doing that. That's not what I do. I'm a facilitator. I'm a consultant. I work with groups. I do interactive presentations, or I do interactive sessions. I don't do that. So my immediate reaction was no. And they said, but we really do. We've got the stage. We haven't got anybody to do it. and we haven't got much time. We really, really need somebody to do it. And then in my usual style, I went, yes. And so I said I would do it, but I was really nervous. I was really nervous preparing for it. I was self-talking myself, Andy, down, and doing all of the things that I try and coach people not to do when they're preparing for something like this. So I've got myself into a funny space, really, about being quite nervous and feeling not good enough to be a keynote speaker and to represent the brand at an event like that. So yeah, however, it all went really well. When I walked off and done it, it was to a round of applause.
Wow,
so
fabulous.
Something went right in between those two spaces, and I haven't had that much time to reflect on what went right between those two spaces. So I thought I'd use this few minutes today to do that.
So let's get into that, Maggie, because I heard there was some great feedback from a number of colleagues that were there. So what was it that made it go so well in the end?
My presentation was on day 2. I had prepared it, and on day 1 I walked around and listened to all the other presentations and got myself more nervous because they were all quite what were they? They felt, I don't know, they felt knowledgeable and they felt deep, and it was a person standing, projecting out, doing a one-way communication in most cases, and I was like, that's not me, I'm not going to be able to do this. But then I said, well, and then I sort of processed it a little bit and thought, actually, what do I do, and what do I do well, and why don't I do it that way? Why am I putting myself under pressure to do it some other way? So that evening I just rewrote didn't even rewrite the content, I just rewrote the structure of how I was going to do it, and actually used questions and engagement to as the core of the presentation. So do it the way I do it well, rather than trying to do it the way somebody else does it. So even at that point, I was thinking, is this going to work? Will it be appropriate? But actually, it did work. So I was able to share the expert content that I wanted to share, but use that in a way that built on the experience in the room, and actually learned a lot myself from doing that. And I know others in the room learned quite a lot from it as well. So just, I think I made a shift in my mind about what good or great looks like in that context, and was willing to be more me and more authentic.
And how did it feel when you were in it, in the moment?
In the moment, it felt really good. In the flow, I was going, oh, this is working, this is okay, I made the right choice. Because if I'd gone with my original presentation, which was me talking for 30 minutes, I know I wouldn't have enjoyed it, and if I wasn't enjoying it, the people in front of me wouldn't have been enjoying it. So in the presentation itself, I really felt in the flow. I was hugely energized, and was really creative in the moment, actually, which is where my strengths are. So sometimes I kick myself for not being enough of a planner, but actually I'm not a planner. I'm better in the moment. I need to do enough planning for it not to fail, but allow the moment to happen. And I think that's where I got to. So it's just given me a little bit more strength and belief in that as a capability for myself to use next time. But I just must remember there's some planning is needed. I've got to do some prep and some planning, but I've also got to allow the moment to emerge and for my creativity to rise in the moment.
So I guess first thing, I haven't really had the opportunity to say thank you for stepping in, because we needed someone there, and we knew that you would be great at it, because what you do so well, and I know from what colleagues have said, is you bring experiences to life, which is super important to us at the Oxford Group. So massive thank you for stepping in and doing it, and for the experience that you created, which was in keeping with what we do at the Oxford Group. One thing I wanted to think about is what could you do with that strength? Where else could you use it or deploy it in future?
I think, to be fair, I probably use it a lot more than I use it a lot already. And I think I had, in my mind, I'd created that formal situation. So there's something about, I enjoy being informal, and there's something about a fear of the formality of a situation. So I've just got to recognize there's something about being my authentic self, regardless of the context. And so in future situations where where I perceive it to be formal, it's okay. I can do my preparation, and I can also be myself, even in the most formal of contexts. So I think it's that realization, actually. So the 2 or 3 weeks of stress that I had, I hope I don't have next time when I'm in that same situation. I'll still do the preparation, but I know there's something about being in the moment that it will be okay.
So what's your one key insight from this conversation, having just reflected on, taking a bit of time to step back on it? What's the one thing you're taking away?
Well, I think the first and foremost, I've got to, when I'm saying yes to things, I've got to really understand what I'm saying yes to. And if my style and preference is suited to the environment I'm saying yes to, go for it. And there will be situations where that isn't appropriate, where I do need to be formal or an expert or present lots of data, and maybe that's not me, or maybe I accept that I can do it, but I won't get the sort of reaction and energy I might get from doing it a different way. So it's part of that realization.
Fabulous. Thank you, Maggie.
That's come to mind. It's interesting, sorry, because we haven't had that conversation, and it's been really helpful. And I was thinking about the virtual world and how sometimes we think, well, we can't give feedback to people because we're not seeing them in the job. But actually, you didn't see me there. You didn't see me in the job, but you were able to create the conversation for me to give feedback to myself.
Yeah, and I think you made such an important point there that in today's hybrid world, the chance of us seeing people do great work is so much more limited than it was before. And even before it, we didn't always see it. You had to really be in the right place at the right time. This is about helping someone to explore themselves, what's gone well for them. Obviously, we knew that there was CIPD, so we framed the conversation around that. And it's just about bringing that stuff out, being able to show a genuine, appreciation for that. Think about how the other person could do more with it, and then give them some time just to reflect back on what actually is the 1 or 2 key things that are going to help them moving forward. So, I mean, that didn't take any time at all. So you see, these conversations don't need to be really, really long conversations. You can get into them relatively quickly. So that's one half of the conversation 3, showing genuine appreciation. The other half is the spontaneous one that's in the moment. When you actually do see something go really well, it might be a client presentation, or it might be a great piece of project work, or a really strong outcome, or someone's gone the extra mile. You're able to then show them appreciation in the moment. The thing that we think is really important, we know this is really important, rather than just patting on the back and saying, well done with that project, because that doesn't quite register enough with people as true recognition. We've got to go a step further, and we talk about the what and the why. So what is it you appreciate, and why that really matters? So I'm going to give some spontaneous appreciation to our colleagues at the foundation here, of which there are a number on the call, because we absolutely love working with you. And the reason we love working with you is you're always so amenable, you always keep your promises, you're always really organized, and genuinely are friendly and engaging. Why does that matter? Because it creates the conditions for us to do our best work together. So thank you to Jen and Mike, who are on the call today. Stu's also here, Polly and others from the foundation, who really do help us in creating the right conditions for success. So that is an example of spontaneous appreciation in the moment. So it was all going so well, wasn't it? We were catching people in rather than catching people out. And then we've got to get to this conversation, dun, 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 the one that everybody spends most of their time and anxiety on: challenging unhelpful behaviour. Now, we're only able to get into this in a small amount of detail today, but we are doing a session on it next week, which is all around not having the conversation is not helping. And it's centred in this conversation and radical candor by Kim Scott. So if you're able to join us next week, please do so. If not, just register and you'll get the recording. So this conversation, challenging unhelpful behaviour, is a really important one, because we know that people need feedback, or they need support in terms of shining a light on the things that they might not even realize are unhelpful. We also know if we don't challenge things that are unhelpful as leaders, they can spread and become bigger issues for either the individual or the team or the organization. And what we like to think is the tool that we use that supports this conversation, non-violent communication, the work originally of Marshall Rosenberg, who's sadly no longer with us, is a really strong way to have an adult-to-adult conversation to challenge something that isn't helping. We're not talking about gross misconduct here. We're talking about little things that happen on a day-to-day basis that just aren't helpful. And this is how we go about challenging them. There's 3 core things. So we need to know what's going on in ourselves. We need to be empathetic, and we need to be curious about what was going on from the other person's perspective, because the likelihood is they haven't done this with malicious intent. We just need to understand them a bit more. But it's also about knowing that we need to be straightforward in challenging this. So this is the flow for a non-violent communication conversation. So I noticed this yesterday. It made me feel frustrated. It made me feel uncomfortable. It made me sad. If it's a good thing, it might have made me happy, for example. But we are naming how it made us feel. And there is a list of verbs to describe feelings on the non-violent communication website, because that's a really important thing, being able to name your feeling. We also want to know what was going on for the other person. So what was going on for you in that moment? Why did you do X, Y, or Z? And how were you feeling? So we're trying to really understand deeply from their perspective what was happening. We're trying to make sure that we don't bring any judgment into the room. So we're trying to keep this as factual as we can. Now, once we've understood that, we've got an idea of why they did it, but it still doesn't mean it's right. So what we need to do is we need to describe to them what our need is in that type of situation. So in a similar situation, just so you know, I've got a need for collaboration. I've got a need for engagement. I've got a need for people to be able to be authentic and vulnerable. What about you in similar situations like that? Again, there's a list of needs on the non-violent communication website that you can use, and we share more deeply in the program itself. And there's some in the 5 Conversations book as well. And lastly, we get to requests. So we get to the point where we're actually saying, look, moving forward in this situation, can you make sure that you don't do this? Or I would rather you do this. What about your requests of me? What do you need from me to try and make sure that this doesn't happen again? So you can see the flow is very adult to adult. We're trying our best to understand and to be empathetic. And we're taking a joint responsibility to deal with this challenge. Now, sometimes that approach doesn't work. I'm a realist. I've been in these situations many times before where the other person just won't play ball, and they don't want to get into the conversation. And that is always difficult. We can only try our best. And if they don't want to play ball, then we would just go down the one side of the story. Look, okay, I can tell, this is, you're not kind of getting into this conversation with me. So let me just be really straight with you. This is what I saw. This is how it made me feel. These are my needs moving forward. And this is what I'm going to request of you. And we move on from there. Depending on how the other person goes will depend on how you respond. Ideally, we want to get into that dialogue to break things down and to get into the other side of the conversation, but that's not always possible. So that is the high-level overview of conversation 4, challenging unhelpful behaviour in a way that's adult to adult and hopefully builds trust if we do it correctly and people are willing to engage with us. So I'm going to hand over to Maggie now to see us out.
Thank you very much, Andy. So the final conversation is conversation 5, building for the future. And I think this is a really powerful conversation, probably first and foremost to have with ourselves. So if anybody regularly talks to themselves, this is a good one for you to try out. So conversation 5 is about having the you might recognize this actually from if you've done any career work. It's we call it's the future focus wheel, but it's sometimes seen as the career wheel in other contexts. And it allows an individual to really think about where they're at now, where am I now, and where do I want to be in the future in terms of my ambitions at work. So the blue line here in this example is about where I am now. It's an individual has marked where they what they get from their current role. The red line is what I want from a future role. And this is about having a conversation with that individual to help them understand, first of all, what they mean by those elements. So it's a real conversation in curiosity. So when an individual says, right, mastery and learning is here and I want it to be there, what does mastery and learning mean for you? What's it look like in your current role today? And what does it need to be in the future? And how can we bridge that gap? So that's the conversation. It's about helping an individual to really think about their future. A lot of managers miss this conversation in their skill set, in their repertoire of conversations. Partly it's missing it because there's a fear. What if I can't answer? What if I can't answer what they're asking? Or what if the answer is they want to leave my team and they're too good and I don't want them to leave? Actually, if you don't have the conversation, they're more likely to leave. So have the conversation, because the chances are it deepens, it helps to deepen the relationship. So it's that future focus. Again, we can have this conversation with colleagues, we can have it with others in our stakeholder groups too. And it's about that where I'm at now and where I want to be in the future and how I can bridge those gaps. Typically, it's an 18 to 24 month conversation, and it fits quite nicely in the performance management cycle, in that sort of end of year meeting where you're reviewing objectives and you're thinking about future, if you're thinking about future objectives, because it really can connect to an individual's why. So it's back to conversation 2, it's back to building trust from conversation 1. There's an opportunity to provide feedback, telling people when they've done something well, sharing feedback about things where things haven't gone so well. So it really sort of incorporates and builds on all of the other conversations. We identified these categories from our research that are generally important to people when they're assessing their careers and where they're at. But you could actually swap some of these out if there's a factor that's more important, or you could have an other in here that the individual completes themselves, something that's not here that is important to them. So it's that future focus wheel and taking time out every, once a year, once every 18 months to really help the individual think about what's next for them. And it demonstrates an investment. So you're investing in me, and this is not just about my job today, this is about me in the future, which contributes to that positive relationship. So yeah, that's conversation 5. Again, more to say on that, but in our taster session today, I think that's probably enough. And we're racing to the end of our time together, and we don't want to have you come over. So if we move to the next slide, Andy, I guess this is really about thinking about which conversation is most important in your organization right now. If you can remember how to use the stamp button, that would be great to see what your views are on it, what's happening in your organization. And it's nice to see there's a first tick on that, establishing a trusting relationship, because it's the foundation, really. It's that foundation conversation. The rest are easier if you've got that. It's so easy to challenge unhelpful behavior when you've built a habit of doing that together, because when you challenge unhelpful behavior, the other person is also allowed to do it. So it's a mutual conversation. They all are. So I can see there's a building for the future in some organizations. Louise has talked about agreeing mutual expectations. So again, useful to think about it in your context and what you might want to put on your agenda if you're in that HR and L&D space that you're in.
Absolutely.
So
Okay,
I think all that's left to do is to say thank Sorry, Andy. Yeah, go for it.
I was just going to say exactly what you were going to say, actually. If you do want to know a little bit more about 5 Conversations or anything else, a good way to do that is to sign up for our newsletters, a QR code there you can scan with your mobile, sign up to our newsletter. You'll hear all about our events that we do like this and lots of content that we put out there. But yeah, it's been a pleasure to meet you all today, and I'm going to hand over to Jen to see us out.
Thank you so much, Andy and Maggie. That was really insightful today. Thank you to everyone who attended. We're going to put up a quick post-event survey. If you can participate in that, we'd appreciate it, because we like to really run events that are useful for you, and it'd be great to find out more. We will send you a post-event survey just with the recording and with the link to claim your digital credential as proof of CPD today. So keep your eyes posted for that one, and we hope to see you again soon. I've put in the chat the link for next Wednesday's event as well, so do come or sign up if you need the recording after. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.